Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy. Today, we're going to analyze Frank O'Connor's first confession. This is an essay called Understanding and Appreciation, Frank O'Connor's first confession by yours truly, Jimmy. So, what did you think? Hopefully, you read it with me, and you're not jumping to this analysis. Wasn't it a charming story from a child's point of view? Do you remember when you were 7 years old? Do you remember what you believed in, what you were afraid of? Pardon me. Jimmy was raised Catholic, so maybe the story had more meaning to him. But that's not entirely true, especially if we erase our blackboards, like I often tell you to do. Remember, blackboards, erase your blackboard. John Locke, the philosopher, said that because people have been writing on your blackboards all your life. So I tell you to erase that blackboard, bring yourself into the story, and that's what I hope you did with this. Because actually, it's better that you're not Catholic when you read this one, because then you don't have anything to erase, right? So, before I share a personal story from my own childhood, what's this story about? Wait, before I even answer that question, I want to talk about the narrator. Jimmy loves discussing narration because it teaches us critical thinking about real people that talk to us in real life, right? It's important in reading classical literature especially. So, the narrator. As always, it's important to understand the narrator's position in any story we examine. In this one, the narrator is Jackie, the kid. He's inside the story. So he's the first person narrator, which means he is like us, subject to being human. And maybe he's lying. Third person narrators are outside the story, so we have to believe them, or else the story won't make any sense. But in Jackie's case, he's inside that story. Only he's not telling us the story when he was actually 7 years old. I think you'll agree with me on that. If not, I'm going to prove it to you. He's actually telling the story from the present, the today, the now. We can spend another half hour on talking about what does that mean, the now, the present, the past, but I'm not going to do that. Just so you realize he's not 7 years old when this story's being told. He's older. How much older, Jimmy? I don't know. And he doesn't tell us, and it's not important. We actually find out later the Jackie in the story is 7 years old, so this is kind of like a recollection. But we don't immediately know that when the story starts. We just don't. So language is important in understanding narrators. I think you'll agree with that if you've been spending time with me in classical literature, but it's even more important in real life. We depend on our memory of things. You understand that? If you lose your memory, you really don't have a reference point and everything is new to you. There was a story once where a guy was in a coma for a long time, many, many, many years, and he came out and he's looking at a parking meter. And he asks the doctor who he's touring the town with, he says, "What's that?" And the doctor says, "It's a parking meter." He goes, "Well, what's that? What do you do with that?" He says, "Well, you put in a quarter and you buy time." He says, "You can buy time?" Isn't that a fresh concept? Anyway, we get our information from our senses. We filter it, we change it. And it's hard to be objective, isn't it? When you get your senses are not the most reliable. I'm going to prove that to you right now. I've often told you I'm colorblind, right? So here's the proof. Besides, I'm red-green, so my red isn't your red, my green isn't your green. I can't see red. See this circle here? People tell me that there's a number in that circle. Do you see a number in that circle? Okay. I can't see the number, I can't see anything in that circle. In fact, if you told me, "I'll bet you there's a number in that circle," I would bet against you, and I would win because I don't see a number. Well, sure. Hell, Jimmy, there's a number. It's 74. Well, Jimmy, if you can't see the number, how do you know it's 74? Well, somebody told me. The narrator told me. My wife told me. She said, what's the number? I said, 74. Or you can AI. Cut the circle out and ask AI. He'll tell you. I can't see it. I can't see it. So it's the same thing in real-life narration with first-person narrators. You don't know what's inside a person's head. You have to trust what they are telling you until you cannot, until you can't. And the only reason you can't is if you catch the narrator in a lie. That's called reliability of a narrator. And in literature, once you lose your reliability, I'm afraid you can't get it back. In real life, well, you might be able, if the person lied to you, you can forgive the person. But if you lied to the person, maybe he forgives. But sometimes there's a nagging thought, wait a minute, they lied to me before. Remember? Yeah, it's like the judge saying, ignore what you just heard to the jury. It still hangs around their mind, right? Jackie, as the first-person narrator, is a reliable narrator. Quote, all the trouble began when my grandfather died and my grandmother, my father's mother, came to live with us. That's the first sentence of the story. The pronoun my is your clue. This is first-person narration. My is in the story. And we learn a lot from this sentence. I want you to think about this, which is why I spent a lot of time on first sentences, first paragraphs, first pages, right? There's a lot we don't know unless we read the story already and we're not backtracking. Without backtracking, what's this sentence tells us? What does it tell us? Well, the word trouble is interesting since the narrator is telling us it began, sorry, there's a little typo here. It says S-I-N-C-E, right? Sorry. It began when his grandfather died and his grandmother came to live with them. Trouble is one of those wide words. I call it a wide word. What does that mean? Well, it means a lot of different things, isn't it? It could be associated with a lot of different situations. Elvis Presley, if you're looking for trouble, right? That's the difficulty. It means difficulty, distress, danger, trouble. Are you in trouble again? So if you read the story with me, the trouble the narrator is referring to is associated with the grandmother when she moves in. What's the trouble? Well, she drinks porter. She eats with her hands. She walks around the house barefooted. Really? That's trouble? Does that meet your definition of trouble? So the question you really have to ask yourself is, why is the narrator why does he call that trouble? Well, he's 7 years old. Well, Jimmy, you just said he's not 7 when he's narrating. He's not, but he's recollecting what it was when he was 7. Do you have memories when you were 7? The second sentence sort of answers that. Quote, relations in the one house are a strain at the best of times. But to make matters worse, my grandmother was a real old countrywoman and quite unsuited to the life in town. End quote. And there you have it. There you have it. That's a very mature observation for a 7-year-old. That's why we know he's not 7 when he's narrating this. When he's narrating of this story, that's something that happened to him when he was 7 years old, when Jackie was 7. It also helps us quantify the trouble that the narrator's talking about. The grandmother was a real old countrywoman, unsuited to life in town. What does that mean? Well, do you know the difference between country and city living? There's a difference. If you haven't traveled, there's a big difference. I mean, people are people, but there's a difference. Jimmy, that's social distinction. Well, I thought we're all created equal. We are. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about behavior characteristics, which are not all equal. Would you agree with me on that? We're created equal, but we certainly do not behave equally unless you're living in a dream world. Just look around you. So the third sentence further clarifies. It reads like this, quote, "She had a fat, wrinkled old face, and to mother's great indignation, went around the house in bare feet. The boots had her crippled, she would say." Huh, isn't that interesting? There's 25 words in that sentence, but 2 of those words, when I read it to you, should pop out and reveal something about Jackie. What are they? The word mother. Because it shows us the narrator's attitude, right? He doesn't call her mom. He doesn't call her the old lady. He calls her mother. That's a respectful word, isn't it? So it indicates certainly a degree of respect, but more important is the word indignation. Mother's great indignation. He's interpreting what her grandmother was doing to make her mother feel indignation. What's that? Well, that's a strong feeling of anger, displeasure, or outrage caused by something unjust, unfair, or morally wrong. The narrator is attributing indignation to his mother from the grandmother's behavior, walking around in bare feet. Is that true? Did we ever hear anything in this story talk about mother's indignation? No, we have to take Jackie's word for it. He's projecting this. Is his mother indignant? Well, we don't know. Let me ask you it this way. Is there anything unjust or morally wrong walking around a house in bare feet? Some people would argue yes, because it's just unsanitary. Other people would say, nah, I do it all the time. I'm just saying. He describes how his grandmother eats. Quote, "She poured out the potatoes on the table and ate them slowly with great relish, using her fingers by way of a fork." End quote. Whoa, did you ever eat potatoes like that? I've eaten potatoes with a fork with great relish, but I don't eat slowly. It's like, I don't know why. I eat too fast, I think. In other words, the grandmother is very different than what he's used to, isn't it? He talks about his friend who he's afraid to ask into the house because of his grandmother, the O'Connell kid, right? The Sergeant Major's kid. Sounds like a military family. And then the episode when his mother was at work, he wouldn't eat what his grandmother made. Nora tries to make him eat it, but he refuses, goes under the table and takes a knife for protection and then swipes at her when she tries to get him out. And of course, he pays the price because when his father gets home, he gets a flaking. You know what flaking is, right? A beating. Because Nora tells on him. Nora's some type of sister. Brothers and sisters usually have that type of relationship, don't they? Not everybody. A lot of them. But when we learn his name when Nora tells father Jackie. That's how you learn it's Jackie, because Nora uses his name. And that causes conflict in the household on the top of the grandmother. So, words mean things. Did you know that? Since narrators use words in narration, it's important that we not only understand the words being used, but also to gain a certain appreciation for the choice of words that a narrator decides to use. This is very important. A narrator narrating a story in the first person can say anything he wants. Would you agree with me on that? And he could say it anything he wants, any way she wants, he could just start talking. And we've read some jewels on this website, Travel is So Broadening. Did you read that with me? Mr. Schmaltz? Boy, what a character that guy is. Makes you want to punch him in the face, doesn't it? But words and word choice mean something. There's a lot of different ways to say the same thing. Like I told you about the narrator in the story calling his mother mother instead of something else. So word choice reveals us to each other. The minute you start opening your mouth, you start telling people who you are. right? We know it, we believe it, we understand it. It's part of our critical thinking and development. These are clues. Word choice are clues to character. And there's another word that Jackie uses in the opening that's interesting to me, and it's a tell. You know what a tell is, right? When you're playing cards, the guy's got a little tweak when he's got a good hand. His hand starts twitching. That's a tell. Word choice is tell when you use certain words. And the word is fastidious. Fastidious. Quote, now girls are supposed to be fastidious, but I was the one who suffered most from this. End quote. Fastidious is somebody who's very detailed, meticulous, difficult to please. Jackie says girls are supposed to be like that, but he was the one who was like that. He suffered from being fastidious, did he? Well, he doesn't like the way grandmother eats. She doesn't like the fact that she doesn't wear shoes. She drinks porter, right? What would please, let me ask this question. What would please Jackie? Well, Jimmy, I think I could answer that. It would be a grandmother who did not eat with her hands, wore shoes around the house, and didn't drink porter, right? Absolutely. But then there wouldn't be a grandmother from the country, would it? Is he accepting what is grandmother, or is he trying to change grandmother? You see what I'm saying? When he played with that friend I mentioned just a moment ago, Bill Connell, and saw his grandmother coming down the street with a jug of porter, he was, quote, mortified. That's the word he uses. Well, what's that? I was mortified. That's an adjective describing someone experiencing embarrassment. I was ashamed. I couldn't believe it. She's carrying a jug of porter. Holy cow. You see what I'm saying? So what is this porter that they talk about? It's ale, dark ale, from 18th century London, named after the working class street porters who drank it. It's beer. Well, Jimmy, ale's not beer, technically, but it's beer. It's dark beer, right? I'm not a beer guy, but there's dark beer, light beer, right? Regular beer. When other people than you are involved in a situation, it's sometimes embarrassing. Take Bill Connell out of that scene. The grandmother's walking down the street with porter. What is Jackie going to do? He just looks at her and says, there she goes again. But because Bill Connell's there, suddenly it's now, oh my God, he's gonna see how what she is, how regular, how, what's the word Jimmy's looking for? Come on. How normal? No, come on. Jackie just thinks he's a little bit better, doesn't he? Is he? He's 7 years old, for heaven's sakes. But let me ask you this. Have you ever felt mortified? Let me ask you this. Are you difficult to please? Do you get outraged when you see something morally wrong? Or do you care? What's going on in this story? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a 7-year-old boy, right? But you can see from the flow of this narration that these things that Jackie is narrating have taken place in the past. 7-year-old boys don't use words like fastidious. They don't do that. And I want you to note the pronoun in the sentence. Now, girls are supposed to be fastidious, but I was the one who suffered most from this pronoun. What is this? In this sentence, it means fastidious. I suffered from being meticulous. He was too picky. She shouldn't be eating with her hands. You see what I'm saying? He's picky. He's 7 years old. He's trying to be like, 70? Notice what he's done here. He blames his grandmother for the whole household's trouble. And he puts words like indignation in his mother's mouth. He decides he's the real victim of the fastidiousness. That's a kid who's seeing the world through his own hurt. Right? He's not lying. He's a reliable narrator. He's not making any of this stuff. He's filtering it now when he's telling you about when he was 7. And he's trying to capture what he felt like. Can you do that when you were 7? Can you feel how you might be mortified? When Jimmy was in high school, he wore baggy pants. His parents were poor, and he just had baggy pants. And the other boys in the school used to mock him. He went to an all-boys Catholic school. Look at Jimmy's pants, they're baggy. And he went home, and he told his mom, oh, I need new pants, these are baggy. That's all I can afford, shut up. Okay, Ma. And then I went back to school, and when they started picking on me, I picked back. And that's how you defeat being picked on. Did you know that? Did you know that, ladies and gentlemen? When you're picked on, don't just sit there and take it. Pick on them back. Pick back at them. They'll shut up. That's exactly what happens. Anyway, the difference, that's a sidetrack, sorry. Jackie earns our trust because, not because he's really fair, but he's honest. He's being honest with us. But all of that is background to the real story. First confession. Just like the title, this is a story about the first confession. And let me point out a couple of things before I define confession for you guys. When he got his flaking, when his father whapped him, the result was that his mother defended Jackie, his father didn't speak to Jackie, and his mother barely spoke to Nora. They took sides. And Jackie's conclusion? Because of that old woman. They call this last sentence a root cause. I'm going to repeat the sentence he says. And, quote, and all because of that old woman. So his family's arguing within themselves, having conflict because of that old woman. So that's called a root cause in Jackie's mind. The root cause is the underlying reason an issue occurs. And in Jackie's mind, his grandmother is the root cause of all the distress. So later in the confessional, he tells the priest, quote, I had it all arranged to kill my grandmother. He's going to get rid of the root cause. Let me ask you this. Do you think he had it arranged? Did the 7-year-old really intend on committing murder? The narrator, Jackie, has been describing a situation about making his first confession, and to understand his true dilemma, not whether or not he should kill the grandmother, which obviously is not going to do it, but how that relates to the concept of confession, which happens every time you admit to doing something you shouldn't do. But the concept in terms of confession, have you ever confessed to anything? We'll talk about that. I broke a crock this weekend. It was my aunt's old pickle crock, one of those numbered crocks, beautiful. I was cleaning the inside of it, and it slipped from my hand and broke into 3 pieces when it hit the sink. It was horrible, horrible. I immediately confessed, I left the crock in the sink, walked in, found my wife, and said, I broke the crock. I'm sorry. And she said, it's okay. That's confession and forgiveness. Did she give me penance? No, there was no penance, although maybe some people will interpret it. Anyway, confession in the Catholic Church. The story never reveals where it takes place. We think it's Ireland, but it may not be Ireland. It may be New York. Who knows? It's never really clear. It doesn't really matter, right? It's where it takes place is not relevant. Jimmy always tells you stay in the text. And when you do that, what is relevant in this story is the concept of confession, right? The concept of confession. Well, because first confession is the title. Okay. Especially within the Catholic Church, because these are Catholics. In the Catholic Church, I'm going to teach you a little bit here. If you're not Catholic. If you are Catholic, it's a little review. Confession is officially called the sacrament of penance. There's 7 sacraments, but we won't go into that. And it's a ritual where a person confesses their sins to a priest, expresses sorrow, and then receives God's forgiveness and some penance. What's a ritual? Well, that's defined as a structured, repeated sequence of events, of actions, including often words in a specific order. Bless me, Father, for I have... When you go to confession, those are the first words out of your mouth. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. And then you tell them how long it's been since your last confession, blah, blah, blah. So the story, Jackie's being prepared to do his first confession. They're going to teach him the ropes. Who teaches him the ropes? A woman named Mrs. Ryan. Now, Catholics believe that Jesus forgives sins, but a priest acts in the person of Jesus, of Christ. He's the visible minister. He's the guy who was Jesus' representative on earth, and he's the guy that can dish out the forgiveness. It's important to note in the confession concept that it's not unique to Catholics. Catholics are not the only religion with that concept of confession. Eastern Orthodox has it, Lutheranism has it, other religions have it. The first confession, the story we just read, is about Catholics and their ritual about this. So, Jimmy, where's the proof? Where the hell's the proof? Well, the enclosed wooden confessional box, remember where Jackie falls off the thing where you put your when you're kneeling there, you put your arms on it. It's divided by a screen, a sliding shutter, and it's a unique physical trademark of Roman Catholic churches, these confessionals. There's two sides to the confessional. Priest gets in the middle, and he goes back and forth hearing people's confession as they line up outside. Go in, confess, get absolution and penance, and leave. Boom, boom, boom. Right? The opening phrase, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I told you that. That's a clear sign this is a Roman Catholic sacrament of penance. And finally, the concept of a priest assigning specific prayers like the Hail Mary. If you remember, Jackie gets 3 Hail Marys for his confession. It's penance so that he can get absolution. So in preparing for confession for the first time, the woman Ryan prepares him. Remember that scene, that great scene where she holds the candle up and she's got a half a crown, let's say, $5. I don't know how much a crown was worth in those days. And she holds it. She says, I'll give this to anybody who can hold their hand in this flame for 5 minutes. And if you can't do that, imagine doing that for eternity, burning in hell. Scares the poop out of people, doesn't she? 4 steps to making a good confession, right? Contrition, you got to feel genuine sorrow. And you got to have a sincere intention of not committing it again. The person must verbally state all their mortal sins. What's a mortal sin? Well, it depends on your definition. Murdering your grandmother would be a mortal sin. And you got to say it out loud. It's not like you just think about it. This is the Catholic Church, by the way. So the priest then assigns penance, usually prayers or something, act of charity, to help heal the damage caused by the sin. And then you get the absolution where the priest pronounces the words of forgiveness, I absolve you, etc. So it's important to note that Jackie's concern is making a bad confession. This story is about first confession, but it's also about a bad confession. And he will have to admit that he wants to kill or arrange to kill his grandmother. If he doesn't say that, he's going to make a bad confession. So what is a bad confession? He's also got to tell the priest that he went at his sister with a knife. Well, a bad means being harmful, right? It's morally wrong as opposed to good. You remember when in Genesis, which is on our website, and we read that after God made the world, he would say whenever he made something or brought it into existence by just saying it, he would say, this is good. He saw it was good. The third person narrator tells us. He saw it was good. So that's the difference between good and bad. In this case, bad is when a person withholds. He fails to meet the spiritual requirements. He doesn't say it out loud. He doesn't tell them. So what does that mean? Well, it could mean a lot of different things, including concealing a serious sin, lacking contrition, you're really not sorry you did it, and refusing to do the penance. So if you violate any one of those things, it becomes not confession, but a bad confession. And in this story, the fear of making a bad confession is driving this plot forward. That's what's at the root cause of the plot, the bad confession. Mrs. Ryan, in a very important scene, terrifies Jackie by telling the children and Jackie a graphic story about a mysterious stranger who shows up at the priest's bed in the story and asks to go to confession, and he leaves just as mysteriously, leaving burn marks on the furniture because he was lying to the priest. Quote, there was one sin he kept back, the guy in the story, being ashamed to mention it, and now it was always on his mind. And then the priest knew it was a bad case because the fellow was after making a bad confession and committing a mortal sin. Mortal sins were not venial sins, even though the word venial is not used in here. That's some of my Catholic background slipping out. Mortal sins are really bad. Really bad. Guaranteed hell. Sorry. In Catholic theology, a mortal sin is the most serious category. It's defined as a grave offense against God's law that destroys the relationship between the soul and God. You know what? I encourage you to read Genesis on my website. It'll explain a lot of this relationship that we have with God. Now, if you're an atheist, you could still read it, erase your blackboard, and you'll enjoy the story. But what happens is when you sin, it really doesn't matter if it's moral or when you sin, you cut yourself off from God. So if a person dies in a state of an unconfessed mortal sin, according to the Catholic Church, they will suffer eternal separation in hell. Jimmy's reading the Inferno on this website, if it's not done already. And it's an interesting place, hell. But now you know why the candle scene plays into Jackie's fear, right? He wanted that money, that $0.50. But imagine putting one of your fingers, just one finger, in the candle for 5 minutes. I don't know anybody who could do that for 5 minutes. Do you? So Jackie knows killing his grandmother is wrong, trying to stab Nora is wrong, but if he makes a bad confession and doesn't tell the priest what he did, he's doomed. Can you imagine for a moment what that does to a 7-year-old kid? That conflict? I'm going to hell? Well, Jimmy, there is no hell. Well, you can't say that. You're in this story now. There is a hell. In fact, Mrs. Ryan describes hell pretty good. They used to describe that to us pretty good. Nobody wanted to go to hell when I was a kid. I still don't want. I don't want to go to hell. Go to hell. Sorry. Can you really believe he was going to kill his grandmother and chop her body up for drinking porter and eating with her hands? Anyway, the priest overcomes this by using one of my favorite words, empathy. Empathy, not sympathy, empathy. Empathy. Okay, empathy. Empathy is the ability to go beyond sympathy. Sympathy means feeling pity or sorrow for another person's hardship. Usually from the outside, you're not in the situation. You feel sorry for them. Oh, I feel so sorry for you. But empathy actually goes into the other person's shoes. So there's a great old Star Trek episode called, oddly enough, The Empath. I encourage you to find it and watch it. It's where this creature called an empath can actually take on another person's suffering, because that's what empathy does. You show not sympathy, oh, I'm sorry for you. You actually take on the suffering of the person. So you should watch the Star Trek episode. Anyway, here's the setup. Ready? Was it coming to confession you were, my poor man? The priest asked Jackie. It was, he says with a sob. Oh, a big hefty fellow like you must have terrible sins. Is this your first? It is, Jackie says. Worse and worse, the crimes of a lifetime. I don't know that will I get rid of you at all today. See how he's empathetic to him? He's, oh my gosh, you got your 7 years, it's your first confession. You better wait until I'm finished with these old ones. You can see by the looks of them, they haven't much to tell. Well, okay, Father, he says, and he's happy. The relief was enormous. Nora stuck out her tongue from behind the priest's back, but I couldn't even be bothered retorting. I knew from the very moment that the priest opened his mouth, he was an intelligent guy. I'm paraphrasing. You can read it with me here. So when I had the time to think, Jackie said, I saw how right I was. It only stood to reason that a fellow confessing after 7 years would have more to tell than people who go every week. You see how illogically he works that out? And of course, then there's the empathy that the priest shows. The priest uses the Socratic method. What's that, Jimmy? The Socratic? Well, it's the method that Socrates used to use. Ask questions to get at the result. We'll study it here when we read Plato and Socrates. The priest uses a series of questions to gain empathy, make Jackie feel like he's part of him. What put that into your head to kill his grandmother? What way is she awful? And what would you do with the body? Do you know you are a terrible child? Is that the little girl that was beating you up just now? Someone will go for her with a bread knife one day and he won't miss her. How's that for empathy? Nora was a little witch, wasn't she? And then the priest says, you must have great courage. Between ourselves, there's a lot of people I'd like to do the same, but I don't know. I never had the nerve. Hanging is an awful death. You see that? You see that beautiful sentence? But I want you to note Jackie's reply. He says, I was always very keen on hanging. I liked hanging. I was always keen on it. Keen. Remember what I said about word choice. Could have said, I always liked hanging. It was always interesting. In any case, they talked for 10 minutes. And then, quote, outside after the shadow of the church, the sunlight was like a roaring of waves on a beach. If you've never been in a church for an extended period of time, especially if you go to a confessional where it's pitch black, and then you come out into the sun, it's unbelievable how your eyelids you can't adjust right away, right? And you know that. Those are your rods and cones in your eyelid adjusting to the light. When the frozen silence melted and I heard the screech of trams, my heart soared. I knew now that I would not die in the night and come back leaving marks on my mother's furniture. It would be a great worry to her, and the poor soul had enough. See, he's got empathy for his mom. Now, the ending is ironic because Jackie gets bullseyes from the priest. Nora says, Lord God, some people have all the luck. I might as well just be a sinner like you, which is actually ironic because she's more of the sinner, right? Okay, I want to examine the plot a little bit and see what you make of the plot. So this is usually where I bring in my buddy Aristotle. Aristotle says stories have 6 main elements: plot, character, diction, thought, spectacle, and song. Plot is the most important element. Why? Because it's the representation of human action. And I want you to note the word representation. Stories, dramas, tragedies are representations They're not real, they're representations. Aristotle means that this word, representation, is the fundamental human drive to depict, render, and understand reality through creative expression. Because we just talked about, red and green colorblind, right? What is reality? What is real? Well, we know stories are not real, right? Real life is real. Did this ever really happen? Who cares? This is a story. It's a representation of what could happen. Maybe it did. It doesn't matter. We're reading a story. To represent means to stand for, to symbolize. Words are every word in the English language is a representation of something, of some type of reality. For example, the word chair. When I say that word chair, there's an image that comes to your mind. Your image of a, quote, chair is not the same image as my image of a chair. And while it may be, it's probably not. There's a zillion images of chair. Chair is just a word. It's a representation. Every word ever written is a representation of reality. You understand that? So in stories, unless they are not stories, all of the characters are representations. They're not real. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. Remember that line from Dragnet? The names have been changed to protect the innocent. Well, the names may have been changed, and maybe it's a real guy, maybe it's a real, who knows? But it doesn't mean that they are not real. In fact, you've heard me quote Dostoevsky many times. The characters you meet in literature are sometimes more real than real people. Why? Because we can look inside their heads. We can see inside their heads. We can study them. We can go over and play the tape again, right? We can read the story again and again and again and see more and more and more. It's not a contradiction. You can live 300 years, and you'd never meet all the people you meet in classical literature. Do you understand that? Hamlet, Macbeth, Lieutenant Henry, Jackie, Nora, the priest, Mrs. Ryan. Have you ever met people like that in real life? I'm sure you've met some of them, right? Have you ever met somebody who's obsessed? That's Macbeth. Did you ever meet somebody that's obsessed? How about a guy who's a hypocrite? A deserter. Have you ever met a deserter? Stopped? In other words, he quit. Did you ever meet a quitter? Aristotle said plots can be simple or complex. Complex ones are required for successful stories. So do the characters' actions drive the plot forward? Do the actions of Nora and Jackie, do they make sense? Of course they do. Does any of these characters experience reversal or recognition? If so, we're dealing with a complex plot. If somebody undergoes a recognition or a reversal from the way he was, it's complex. Simple plots don't do that. In a simple plot, you often wonder, where the hell did that come from? Where did that come from? Right? For example, you may or may not know the horror movie Halloween, right? I'm sure everybody's seen Halloween. Halloween is a simple movie. The momentum, the plot, it never reverses. Michael Myers escapes, he targets Laurie Strode, and he relentlessly stalks her. Boom, scene after scene after scene after scene after scene. It's boring. The trajectory is a straight line of rising tension. But in First Confession, there's ups and downs and side twists and angles. Jackie realizes it's not right to kill his grandmother, if he really intended it anyway. And there's a reversal. Jackie gets the prize, the bullseye. Do you remember bullseyes? I don't know if you do. You can look it up. They were beautiful caramel with a little white inside. They were called bullseyes. Jimmy loved them. The plot also should be unified, beginning in the middle and an end, which it does. That's First Confession. So really, what is the plot of First Confession? Here it is. Boy is making first confession, realizes he has to confess everything, is afraid of making a bad one, and going to hell or burning his mother's furniture, right? He overcomes his fear of confession with the help and empathy of a priest. That's the story. But boy, that doesn't compare to what O'Connor did with writing it, does it? And it's a representation. It's a good story, isn't it? My last topic is morality. Did you ever have the urge to confess something? Not something you didn't do, but something. Did you ever, so you did something and you just, oh God, it's killing me. I got to confess it. One of the great stories that I hope to read one day on my website and YouTube channel is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a 700, the reason I'm hesitating to read it, it's 700 pages. Who's got the time to read 700 pages? Well, Jimmy does, and he's going to make the time. It's a story about a guy named Raskolnikov who decides he's a poor student and he kills a pawnbroker and her sister in the first 100 pages. And then in the other 600 pages, he's playing cat and mouse with the detective trying to catch him. And he wants to confess. He wants to confess. He wants to show that he doesn't care. I'm going to confess. I don't care. It's a very psychologically driven, it's unbelievable. Changed my life. Anyway, did you ever feel you had to confess something? You know, what is wrong? I told you about the crock pot, right? That was an accident. Did you ever do anything wrong? Email me. No, don't. No, do not email me if you did something wrong. I don't want to know. So, let me ask you this. If you do something wrong and no one sees it, did you do wrong? Oh, boy, what an interesting question. Right? Besides, who would you tell? Who are you going to tell about something you did wrong? What if you confess to something someone else did to save a person? Are you lying? You see how complex this is? Morality is complex. Whether we're talking about the Catholic Church or any other kind of church, and this goes back to the John Locke blackboard concept. People have been writing on our blackboards what is right and what is wrong. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all need stuff written on our blackboards. Otherwise, how the hell do you function? But the whole thing is what is on that blackboard? Is it really real? Or did somebody just make it up and write it? Right? I told you about the stoneware crock pot that I broke, right? Confession and forgiveness. I told you that story. I didn't get 3 Hail Marys for breaking the crock. Anyway, the Catholic sacrament of penance is admitting to a priest. It's a ritual, and it's part of the religion. Jimmy was brought up a Catholic, and he remembers making his first confession and first communion. A communion is another sacrament, but that's not part of this discussion. You usually make confession and communion together when you're around 7. They call that the age of reason. I don't know why. I never knew why. But apparently the age of reason is when you know the difference between good and evil. You've bitten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? It's not an exact age. You could be 4 years old and know the difference. I suspect most of us know. Anyway, here's my personal story. Jimmy was an altar boy. An altar boy served at Mass with the priest and performed part of the rituals of the Mass. So usually in the old days, when Jimmy was young, you had 6 altar boys serving with the priest. They would be around to serve the priest, help him out with the Mass, bring him things like water to wash his hands. There's a lot of rituals involved in a Catholic Mass. So he was an altar boy. And he did this, he became an altar boy at a very early age. He was 5 years old, and he was in kindergarten. My mother thought I wanted to be a priest. She was so happy. That's not why I became an altar boy. So Jimmy learned by watching older altar boys. That's how you learn. You watch older people behave. That's how you learn. That's how you get things, by the way, written on your blackboard. You start watching older people, how they behave, and then it gets written on your blackboard, and you think that, oh, that's okay to do that, right? Or, oh, that's not okay to do that. In any case, there were different stations when you were altar boy. Like I said, there were 6. And when it came time for Jimmy to serve in the ringer, bell ringer, there's a bell ringer position. That was in the upper right, closest to the middle priest was. You were the bell ringer. You would ring bells. There's little bells you'd hold in your hand and you'd ring at various points in the Mass. So Jimmy was serving as the bell ringer. And he also learned by watching the other older boys that when you serve in that position, you receive communion before anyone else. In other words, it's a very special position. You get to receive communion, which communion is the wafer that's supposedly the body of Christ. And the priest gives it to himself. He gives it to the altar boys, and then he goes into the general parishioners, right? So so it was a great honor when Jimmy got to be the bell ringer, and he received the communion. And my mom would go to Mass in the morning. This was like the 5:30 Mass. And before she would go to work, she would take me and walk me to the church because it was a little way away. And she would go to Mass. She would hear a Mass before she goes to work, and she could take me. So like the others, when it came my time, I stuck out my tongue, and the priest put the host on it. And I was kneeling right in front of him. He gave me the communion. I closed my mouth, I got up, and I walked with the priest to the parishioners now who were also going to receive communion. And because I was the bell ringer, I got to carry what they call a paten, P-A-T-E-N, paten. What's a paten? Well, it's a golden dish with a handle on it that you hold below the person's chin, just in case when the priest is giving that person the host, it slips. You do not want the host, that little wafer, which is God, Jesus. You don't want it slipping and falling on the ground, so you hold the paten, right? It's the paten. So when I came to my mother, who was receiving communion, I still had the communion host in my tongue, in my mouth. I didn't dissolve it yet, right? They were big in those days. So I opened my mouth and I showed my mom it's on my tongue. And she got mortified. Remember the word mortified? She was embarrassed. She put her eyes down, totally mortified. So she receives communion and puts her eyes down. She just doesn't know what to say. Then I started, they taught me do not chew the host. Let it dissolve and swallow it. The point is, I was too young. I didn't make confession, my first confession. I didn't make my first communion. I didn't do those sacraments. You have to be prepared to do. I was too young. So after Mass, my mom runs to the vestibule where the priest was taking off his Mass robes, and I was there helping the priest, defrock, take his Mass clothes off, and the priest, she starts telling me, "Oh, Father, I'm sorry. Oh my God, he didn't. Oh my God." She's just crying. The priest listened with empathy, like the priest in the story, and he says, He says, "Mrs., I wouldn't worry about this. Jimmy's too young to have any sins to have confessed anyway." And then he turned to me and he said, "Just wait till your first communion before you do this again. Won't you, Jimmy? And by the way, let's keep this between us." That's a true story. That's a true story. My mother whacked me when I got home. She said, "What are you doing?" I said I was doing what the other guys. I'm learning, Mom. But now you know what I mean by characters in story, being sometimes more real than real life itself. I really enjoyed this story, and I hope you did too. Thanks for coming by. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. This is my analysis of Frank O'Connor's first confession, and I hope you found it stimulating. Hope you go back and read it again. You'll get more out of it. Please visit and read other stories and classics on my website, hundreds and hundreds of hours. And if you have a question or comment, email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Thanks for coming by.